Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. It's Nathaniel from Chessit, and today I'm going to be analyzing one of the most accurate games I've ever played, which actually happened 2 days ago in my first tournament in 2 years. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Now, in this game, I was playing black, and I was playing an opponent who was roughly 1600 rated, and of course I was pretty much unrated, I believe, since this was my first tournament since summer 2023. So, I decided to play the Carl Khan, which is my main opening for black. He goes e4, I play c6, and we played a good bit of theory, which I won't bore you with, but he continues with d4, I go d5, he pushes, this is the advanced Caro, I play c5, he doesn't take, which is considered bad because I can just push my pawn and then I'll be winning this pawn back, I have a stronger center. Instead, he goes c3, I go knight c6, he goes knight f3, now I take on d4. This computer saying that this is no longer book move, but this is still prep. I'm still in prep, he's still in prep. Take, and then I go ahead and play bishop g4, he plays bishop e2, all of this I prepare for once again. I go e6, the idea is I'm able to get my bishop out and then go e6, and generally, once again in the Carl Khan, it's usually a good idea to trade this light squared bishop for this knight, and that's what I'll do later on. Anyways, now we're finally breaking theory. My opponent plays knight c3, and from here, I just continued on developing. I decided to go knight g e7. The plan, this is a fairly common plan in the Carl Khan. The plan is to play knight e7 and then get your knight to either f5 or g6. You really want to target this d4 pawn as much as possible, move your queen out later. So anyways, I go knight g e7, he goes h3, and as I said earlier, it's a good idea in the Carl Khan to trade your light squared bishop for this knight on f3. So he promised me to do it. I trade. He takes back with his bishop, and the idea now is he just has a weaker bishop in this relatively closed position. Now, from here I go knight f5, once again putting pressure on this d4 pawn. He plays bishop d3, that's the only way to defend this pawn. I decide to play queen b6, targeting both this pawn on b2 and this central pawn. Now, there is no way for my opponent to defend both of these pawns, right? Here, there's 3 attackers. He only has 2 defenders currently. And here, there's no defenders. My queen is attacking. So, it's pretty difficult. And my opponent makes one of the only mistakes throughout this entire game and plays knight e2, deciding he wanted to protect this pawn. Now, during the game, I had a choice to make. I was definitely thinking about taking this pawn and then taking this a pawn after he plays like rook here and then takes here. But I was thinking back to games that I'd played online, and I remember analyzing them and seeing that bishop b4 check is the best move because it forces white to lose castling rights by playing king f1. So that's exactly what I'd play. I go bishop b4 check. He goes king f1, and I essentially do not take white's pawn and try to make the argument that this positional advantage is better than that one pawn. From here, I go bishop e7. Now, what you're going to see over the next few moves is me starting to lose this advantage I've built. I should have just castled, looked at my strong position, and kept it that way, but I really struggled to find a plan at this point during the tournament. My idea, as you'll see in a bit, was to further weaken white's structure. So after he goes b3, instead of castling or pushing this pawn to f6, I decided to go bishop h4. And this is actually a miss, which kicks off the end of all of the inaccuracies or mistakes for my opponent and I throughout this entire game. Now, I'm going to go ahead and go back and demonstrate why f6 is actually a good move, or the best move in this position to actually keep my advantage. And that is because no matter what, I'm going to be winning a pawn. If my opponent decides to take, if my opponent decides to take, then I simply take back with my bishop, and I now have 4 pawns eyeing this central pawn, which only has 3 defenders, and there's no way for another defender to come in. And if my opponent decides to play something like bishop h5 check, I simply have g6, he'll have to move his bishop back, and then I can take this pawn, he'll take back, and then I'm able to capture his bishop on e3 with check. Once he takes back, I can play queen takes e3, scooping up this this pawn that will now be on e3, and then scooping up the e5 pawn, and I'll be up 2 pawns, and I'll win the game. So, unfortunately, I did not see this nice f6 idea. I went ahead and played bishop h4. The idea was that after he played g3, which happens in the game, I play knight takes e3, check, and he's forced to take back with the pawn. And now I figured I was much stronger during the actual game, considering white has 2 pawns on h3 and g3 that aren't supporting each other. White has doubled pawns on the e-file. White's king is on f1, and his rook is trapped in the corner here. It's actually not too bad for white, and he's able to become a lot more solid very quickly. So from here, I retreat my bishop back to e7. My opponent plays knight f4, I castle. He plays king g2, connecting his rooks and queen. I decide to go rook a c8, and my opponent pushes a3. Now from here, it took me a while to really think about what the best idea going forward was, but I figured playing knight a5 and just trying to reroute my knight to the center would be strong. He, of course, pushes on b4, threatening my knight. I create an outpost on c4, and my opponent goes queen d3. Now, from here, I was really thinking in the moment, I have to create some sort of advantage. So I go for rook c7, of course, attempting to double my rooks, and notice that his king is on g2. I maybe want to get my rooks in there at some point. However, my opponent just defends this idea by going rook a2, maybe threatening to double his rooks back on this file. I go rook f c8. He pushes on h4. I guess trying to open up maybe this file for his rook, just closing in on my king side. I go a5. I figure that after takes, I'll be winning this pawn on h3, right? I can cycle over my rooks. It doesn't quite work out, though, as my opponent simply pushes on e4. And this is starting to become pretty dangerous for me, because his knight on f4 is poised to enter the square, forking 3 of my pieces. His bishop's there to support, of course. His pawn could take, I lose the game. So I had to think about what to do next, and pretty much my only good move in this position is to play d takes e4. Luckily, I find that. Played d takes e4. My opponent decides to take with the queen. And here he deliberately gives up this pawn on b4. Of course, I take, he takes back, and I take with my queen. Now, the entrant's calling this a mistake. I don't believe so. If I take with my bishop, it'll get pinned, and that's really dangerous. So, taking with the queen's a good idea for earning that pawn. However, it still allows him to attack my queen by playing rook b1, and for a second here, during the game, I was panicking. I thought that he nearly trapped my queen, because after I'm forced to play queen c3, I figured he had some other rook moves, such as, I don't know, rook c2, but fortunately, he didn't have anything good, and opts to just take my pawn on b7. Of course, it's defended by his bishop, his queen, and it would not be wise for me to take back. So, instead in this position, I find a nice little tactic, knight d2. The idea is, of course he can't capture because it's defended by my queen, and if he moves his queen somewhere random, I'm threatening to take his bishop on f3, which would be supported by my knight. Also, I am threatening his queen, and of course I'm targeting his 2 main defenders of this rook on b7. So my opponent really had one move in this position, which was to take my rook on c7. From here, I take his queen on e4, he takes my rook, I take his rook, and it's a nice little simplification. And as you could see, we've both played a near perfect game. I unfortunately lost that advantage in the beginning, yet I want to continue fighting in this endgame, especially since we have oppositely colored bishops. So, my opponent, I figured he would go, like, rook c2 to pin my knight, maybe. But he decides to go rook a7. I play king f8, defending my bishop on e7. He goes bishop g4, putting more pressure on this pawn, maybe threatening to play d5 with the idea that if I take, he wins my rook. So I decide to go knight b5, attacking his rook. He goes rook a4, defending his pawn on d4. I go rook d8, further attacking his pawn, and my opponent sacks his bishop. The computer is giving this a brilliant move. I don't believe so. The reasoning for that is because if I take, he'll have a fork. He'll have a fork with his knight, forking my king and rook. But I am threatening a number of things here. For one, I could simply earn back my pawn by playing rook d4, capturing on d4 with my rook. And my opponent has a choice to either trade or move his rook. He opts for moving his rook to a5. I play knight c7, attacking his bishop for real this time, and my opponent plays bishop b3. Now, this allows for a cool little tactic. I'm able to play bishop takes h4. The idea is that if he takes back with his pawn, I can take with my knight. However, in this sort of endgame, unfortunately, being up a pawn when my opponent and I both have minor pieces and rooks on the board really doesn't mean much. It's still drawn, and as you guys could see, I'm just gonna quickly run through the rest of the recorded part of the game. Once we run down to 5 minutes, we stop notating, but we just continued advancing pieces. We never let each other get an advantage. We traded pawns, traded pieces, and eventually I was able to get my bishop to f4, creating an unstoppable barrier between these two pieces, and I was able to push my pawn to h6, and from there it was just completely dead drawn. My opponent and I agreed to a draw, and I drew a 1600. Now, throughout this tournament, I was also able to beat a couple 1600s. I lost the one, and I drew another. So I'm hoping that my rating's pretty high when it gets adjusted by Tuesday, Wednesday-ish. But for now, I'm going to reveal what the accuracy was for this game according to Chess.com's game analysis feature, which ended up being 93.8% accuracy for myself. I played a 2500. My opponent did as well. And of course, the game was over 50 moves long. So that is definitely the highest accuracy I've gotten for a full-length game. And I am ecstatic for that to be within a tournament, within one of my first tournaments, nonetheless. So I hope you guys enjoyed this analysis. Unfortunately, I could not convert my early advantage from my opening into a win, but I'm glad that I was able to use numerous tactics to ensure that this game remained a draw, even against an opponent who I consider much stronger than me. Remember, 1600 USCF rating or FIDE rating is much higher than Chess.com rating. Anyways, thank you guys for watching. Peace.